We know this happened yesterday afternoon at some point, exactly when we don't know, and we know it happened in the South China Sea, or rather above the South China Sea, during what Mr Marles has called a routine patrol by the Australian Defence Force. Now, as you mentioned, we know that the P-8, the Australian surveillance plane, was approached by a Chinese fighter jet, a fast one. It came up and released flares. We don't know exactly how many, but Mr Marles says two of those flares were very close, or were released very close to the P-8, which of course poses a risk to the health and safety of the pilots. Now, to be clear, no one was injured in this incident and the plane itself was undamaged. But obviously this comes in the wake of a string of similar incidents and encounters which are potentially dangerous between the two militaries. And unsurprisingly, Australia is once again worried and unnerved by what the Chinese have done in this instance. And again, unsurprisingly, it's registered its concerns by lodging diplomatic protests with the Chinese, not just in Beijing, but also with its embassy here in Canberra. Let's take a listen to what the Defence Minister Richard Marles had to say about this encounter, speaking not that long ago here in Canberra.
Having reviewed the incident very carefully, we've deemed this to be both unsafe and unprofessional. Now, let me be completely clear that our aircrew are safe, and the plane was able to land perfectly safely, and it has not been damaged in any way. But we have sought now, in instances of this kind, to have a very set procedure. And so firstly, we are making the incident public. Secondly, we have advocated or raised this issue with the Chinese embassy here in Canberra, and we have also made representations via our embassy in Beijing. Now, our utmost concern will always be for the safety and welfare of the Australian Defence Force personnel, in this instance who are flying the Australian P-8, and we will also continue to undertake activities which assert the rules-based order, because the rules-based order, and in this instance freedom of navigation in the air and on the sea, is fundamental to Australia's national interests.
Richard Marles speaking a short time ago. Of course, Stephen, this happened yesterday as the PM was winging his way to Washington for a meeting with Donald Trump. Is that timing a coincidence, do you think?
Look, we simply don't know, Lorna, is the true answer. Understandably, I think people are already speculating about the timing. Is it a coincidence that this happened as soon as the Prime Minister departs for Washington, D.C.? The reality is we simply don't know and can't really know with any certainty. There are a couple of things weighing against that. One, it's not clear exactly what the PLA would hope to achieve by sending a message like this at such a delicate moment. You could argue it would even be counterproductive. And secondly, it's not clear exactly how across the PM's schedule even senior commanders inside the Chinese military might be, but you definitely can't rule it out. It's simply impossible to say.
It's not the first time this has happened, is it?
No, this has happened many times before, and in fact I think what you're seeing here from the Deputy Prime Minister and from other members of the government is an increased level of concern about how regular these incidences have become. We've seen a pretty constant drumbeat of them every few months or so. We saw one back in February this year, in some ways quite similar, with flares released. We've seen chaff released in recent years by other Chinese aircraft, which risks the engines of Australian aircraft. We've seen sonar deployed in one instance when Australian divers were in the water near a Chinese vessel a few years ago. So it's not constant, but it is happening now semi-regularly, these sort of encounters. What's behind it? Well, in the case of the South China Sea, which is where this incident happened, China is signalling very clearly that it does not want Australia or other Western nations or US allies like Japan in these contested waters. It wants to force Australia out. Similar perhaps in places like the Yellow Sea, even when Australian forces have been on UN missions. But Australia, for its part, is not for turning, and we heard similar from the Defence Minister Richard Marles today, saying Australia would continue to assert its right to freedom of navigation in international waters, including in the South China Sea. But what we see, I guess, today from Beijing is yet another signal that they're not happy with this and they're willing to keep on pushing back against it, even when doing so is dangerous.